Welcome to Adobe Photoshop Lightroom Killer Tips, brought to you by the National Association of Photoshop Professionals. Here's your host, Matt Kluskowski.
I thought it'd be cool to kind of take a look at the anatomy of a preset, kind of what's going through my mind. Not that you want to get into my mind, but kind of, what's going through my head as I'm working on these presets, as I create presets, because I think even though I provide them here on the Lightroom Killer Tips site, I think these are things that you can create on your own. And I think I have a couple of pointers for you to make you more successful in kind of hitting that mark to make a preset more reusable for you. All right, so I'm going to walk you through one of my favorite ones. I created this one called the Wedding Fairy Tale, and I'll click on it real quick just to kind of give you an idea of what it looked like. It might be a little bit overexposed for this example here, but that was kind of the idea. I just liked that really bright type of a high key effect here, but it's a little bit different from high key. But let's just go into the settings here, and you can get a feel for the way that I developed it and what I'm thinking about settings to include and not to include in the preset. And that's the key point here about the anatomy of a preset. What things do you include in the preset as you create it, and what things, even though you might change on the photo here, do you not include because it may not work for another photo. So the idea here was I wanted to kind of go for a desaturated look. So I brought the vibrance down a little bit, and I brought the saturation down quite a bit. And what I wasn't liking was it just made things kind of look dull. So I thought, well, if I come over here to exposure and I brighten, I could try that. I even tried keeping the saturation up, and I tried increasing the exposure. I know I wanted a bright look, but that just made the skin look really to me kind of weird. All right, so I brought the saturation down, and I took the exposure back to 0, and so I started thinking about another way to brighten the photo. If I could just get this back to 0, it would be good. There we go. I started thinking about another way to brighten the photo, and I realized as you desaturate a photo, especially photos with people in it, the skin tones are generally very warm. Okay, well, temperature and tint, mainly temperature here. If I increase that, this is where I realized I was onto something. I was onto an effect that I liked, because I liked what it did to the skin. I liked how it still kept a warm tone to it, but it still had that slightly desaturated look. After I did that, because this is something I would include in the preset, and we'll actually turn it into a preset in just a second here. This is where I came to actually working on the photo a little bit more. Okay, so things like exposure, recovery, fill light, blacks, these are really difficult to incorporate and hard code into a preset, even though I'm going to come over here and increase the blacks because I think it needs some more contrast here. Okay, so I'm definitely going to increase the blacks there. Fill light, maybe just a little bit. Recovery, bring back some of those highlights. Maybe increase the clarity just for a little bit of snap here. And maybe bring the blacks back down just a little bit. Didn't want them up quite that high. And let's see, let's tweak our temperature a little bit, and maybe even a little bit to the positive side with exposure. A couple other things, tone curve. If you wanted to add a little bit of contrast, I might take these shadows over to the left side. Hue, saturation, luminance. This is a great area to include in a preset. So in this example, I'm going to increase the red and the oranges and the yellows, because if you look at the before and after, you can see it kind of brightens their skin a little bit more without me having to go to exposure to brighten the whole photo, because your skins are mostly made up of these reds and oranges and yellows. In fact, it's kind of looking a little bit too overexposed to me. I might bring that temperature down here. Bring the exposure down. But this is definitely anything in hue, saturation, and luminance. You'd want to include this in a preset. Same thing with split toning. I'm not going to do a split toning here, but if you had a cool black and white effect where you went in and tinted the highlights or the shadows, that's something you'd want to include. Detail, not so much, because every photo is going to probably take to sharpening a little bit different. Same thing with noise reduction and chromatic aberrations. Vignettes, in this example here, I might come over here and just crank up the lens correction over to the right. To the left darkens, but to the right adds some white around there. Okay, so at this point, I want to turn it into a preset. So let's come up here, click on this, and I'll just call it Matt's new preset, just so we can find it easily. So what kind of things? I'll check none. What kind of things do we want to turn on? Well, in this example, I'd want to turn on white balance, because white balance was a very big factor here. All right. Now, that said, a lot of times if you just had a portrait preset that maybe you wanted to add some contrast and some color to, including white balance is difficult because you don't know what the white balance of the photo, it could be all over the place and white balance could do weird things. But in this example, it's a big part of the effect. I'm going to skip basic toning for now. Clarity we'd want to include. We'd want to include any color treatments because we did all those things and we want them to stick. We'd want to include any vignettes. All right, split toning we didn't do, but normally I'd include that. But here's where we get into the sticky part, and this is where the anatomy comes in. For the most part, I wouldn't include exposure and recovery and fill light and blacks, clipping and all these things because they're very difficult. Every photo is going to respond a little bit differently to these things. All right. So I know that every single photo, even when I have to apply a preset to a photo, I know that I'm going to go in and adjust these things. This is just basic Lightroom 101. These 4 sliders are things that I'm going to adjust on every single photo just about. Okay, so regardless of the preset, it's pretty much impossible to make one that will always respond well to the exposure and the recovery and the highlight change and all that. But I might include some of the highlight recovery and the black clipping because that gave me some contrast. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to click create. So let's hit reset, and then we'll know that, you know, it's going to work just fine on this photo, right? But let's take a look at another photo. All right, so let's just go to another one here that we haven't worked on. And I'm going to click on my preset. So let's apply it to this photo and see where things start to fall apart. Well, as I look at it, it might have gotten a little bit too bright over here. So maybe I want to crank the recovery up a little bit more on this example here. Maybe I can hold a little bit more exposure on this example, okay? Or maybe not, but here's the thing. I didn't include it in the preset, so it leaves the exposure alone. This is for you to come in and adjust. All right, I always come in and adjust these things. Blacks, I think it went too high on the preset, so that's why I would probably come in here and pull back a little bit, maybe even open up some of the shadows with some fill light there. All right, but that's kind of the idea behind a preset. You know, what would I include? Most of the time, I just would not include any of these 4 sliders here. Sometimes I do, but whenever I do, I always know, or I always, at least if I'm giving them to other people, just kind of give people a little guideline. It's use it for this type of a photo, use it for a bright photo outside, or use this for a dark photo, a sunset photo with a blue sky and clouds and things like that. So if the presets are for yourself, you'll start to build a list, hopefully not this big over here, but you'll start to build a list. And hopefully you'll know which ones that you like and what things you have to do to tweak them. If you're going to share them with other people, and just kind of give them some guidelines. Tell them what types of photos these things tend to work better with. All right, so there's kind of just a little behind the scenes of what's going through my mind, like you really wanted to know when I'm creating a preset. I hope you enjoyed. My name is Matt Kluskowski. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.